I had a conversation recently with a head of marketing in a company that does a couple million a year. We were talking about data reporting because we built them a custom data dashboard to interact with their own marketing data. And I asked her a little bit about, from her previous experience, because she's worked with a lot of different kind of marketing operations teams, when does it make sense to actually implement data tracking in your marketing? And at what stage does that make sense? What she said made a lot of sense, which is that generally she tries to implement data tracking as soon as possible in any team that she gets put on. And the reason that is because it's a lot harder to backfill the data if you haven't started tracking it earlier. So if you run a marketing campaign but you don't have the proper UTM links in place, it's going to be really hard to track where the traffic came from properly if you didn't have the stuff set up to begin with. Whereas if you set up the tracking, you might have a bunch of raw data that you don't have insights from later, but in future you have all the raw data that you can go back to and analyze. And so that's actually what we helped them do, is we basically took a bunch of raw data that they hadn't really analyzed and put it into useful insights so that they could actually extract information from it. But fundamentally, she has really struggled because there hasn't been a lot of tracking in this new position that she's at. And so she's working on implementing A, more tracking, but B, also more processing of that data, raw data, into more useful insights. And when I say raw data to useful insights, it's taking all the sources and all the leads and all the deal sizes and understanding which deals are more profitable, which lead sources are more profitable, which lead sources are harder to liquidate acquisition costs from, and things like that. And this information becomes really, really useful because now she's using that to drive decisions in marketing. We're not going to put 10 grand into an event because 10 grand into an event is actually really hard to recover because our cost of acquisition is XYZ, but it takes 3 months to liquidate that cost, 3 months to get that money back that you spent on the event on average. Whereas if you put it into Instagram, maybe it only takes 1 month. These kinds of insights is what you get from all those tracking numbers. And so you can make better decisions in your marketing so that you can take your dollars and make them stretch further, essentially. And I think this is especially the case for startups that want to get VC funding, because investors will always have questions about data and things like that. And this is something that she told me, but she worked with a couple startups that were around Series C. Basically, whenever their board meetings came around, they were scrambling to put together the numbers and whatnot, and it was a complete mess because they didn't have the right data tracking in place. And so she basically said now she advocates to implement tracking as soon as possible, and then she does more analysis on the data itself because it drives a bunch of decisions, but also it means that all of the numbers that are needed for board meetings and whatnot, when you have a lot of investors, when you have a complex cap table, when you're getting VC funding, they're all there. And she's seen companies struggle with this in the past. And so I thought that was a really interesting comment, and I thought to make a little video about it because it's what we've been helping them do, is kind of like take their numbers and get insights from them. But I also think it's an interesting thing to point out because I think a lot of companies neglect data tracking because it's the kind of thing that you don't think about until you start to ask questions about, oh, should I do this or that? And you realize that you don't actually have the numbers to back your answers. And so at best, you're guessing. Guesswork in a business generally does not tend to be the most efficient option. It's really powerful when you have the right numbers, but a lot of people think about that when it's too late, right? You need to think about reporting and just adding the data tracking before the fact, not after the fact. Anyway, feel free to ask any questions about the project or otherwise in the comments below, and I will answer as many as possible.